Human for me is being able to, obviously being alive, so living and breathing like all mammals. The second thing is actually being able to make your own decisions and plot your own way forward, which I think is exceptionally important. I'm not just born into a certain realm, and when I die I'll still be in that same realm. So if I can get better limbs, for instance, and nanoes in my bloodstream that cleans up all my cholesterol, and some injections for aging, I'll just live longer and I'll be able to be human longer. We are definitely on the cusp of becoming cyborgs, you want to call it that. I don't know if it's 10 years or 15 years or 50 years or 100 years, but we're definitely moving in that direction. And it's an interesting question about, does it make us less human? In my mind, probably not. Because as long as I can still make my own decisions, and I'm just enhanced, I still believe I am human, or what makes me human.
I think we live in a pretty turbulent time at the moment. There's a lot of very questionable things that authorities are doing. It's kind of like a car heading towards crossroads, and you're not really sure which way it's going to go, but there's sort of a tipping point.
We're coming up on a crisis of not being able to allocate capital and value to the places that need it. And that's going to cause a situation where we're going to have stuff, and we're going to have value, and we're going to have starving people. We're going to have these three things, and they're just not going to meet each other. Like, starving people aren't going to get the food, the people who make the food aren't going to get the value, the people who have the value might starve, who knows, because all the food goes away because nobody's growing it.
The problem is we're very selfish. So if you look at what we're doing with climate change, we just, for the most part, we just don't seem to care. If I look at personally my daily life, do I ever think about these things? No, I don't. Yes, my footprint is much lower than normal people's footprints, but it doesn't keep me awake at night.
I see the world today as very segmented, in desperate need to find ways to aggregate opinions and to agree with others. In a desperate situation to find instruments that allow us to aggregate all selfish actions into a collective wealth.
If we talk about, things like the Amazon cloud services, like when Amazon server in Houston goes down, you see tons of websites across the world all go down at once. You think about the internet as this very, decentralized, separate space, but realize that at the end of the day, kind of one server farm in Houston, Texas, is controlling all these websites and funding all these things, right?
There are lots of big powers that are in control right now, and are trying to lead all the world to kind of productive machine that only feeds these powers, and for the people that is pushing forward this machine, there's not much hope for changing or for having a better future.
In order to control a group that is mostly, the average sort of human group, the average human collective, you only need 3% of the collective that needs to be well aligned and well organized to essentially shout down and dictate the alignment, the interests of the group. There's already people that have sort of noticed that this is increasingly the case where the traditional defenders of the sort of liberal movement that have been tended to be sort of left of center, the sort of political home ground is actually changing. It's sort of morphing under their feet, and that sort of left of center political ground is increasingly being taken over by sort of more hardline, relatively anti-liberal people that are trying to sort of push particular sort of illiberal agendas. And oddly enough, on the right of center ground, we're starting to get this kind of quite heavily libertarian influence that is sort of introducing, oddly, a sort of more liberal attitude. And the world's getting a little bit confused.
Well, I certainly think that blockchains are around because we see problems in our current political and government systems that we want to solve. And blockchains is a technological exploration into that process. I wouldn't say that today the blockchain systems that exist are themselves political. Like, I don't think that any blockchain has the motivation to, overthrow governments or make political changes in our daily lives. But I think that what we're trying to prove is that blockchains can replace our political systems. And in a world where we should prove that they can replace our political systems, and we have a world that's ready for blockchains to do that, then they will start to actually truly become political systems. But I think to say that they are that way today would not be correct.
We're building a socially engaged platform, and we're trying to build now a political system on top of it. And so on-chain governance, it's explicitly, we're trying to design a political system. And we go back to the beginning. I mean, I did some work on the voting system. We can design something that's better than what other people have done.
We are technologists, we are designers, we are members of a community that are designing a social system for strangers to interact and to align.
This is a proof of stake system. It's secured by the token holders, and staking is a large part of that. That's sort of how we technically secure the protocol, but the governance is part of it too, in a way. How do we ensure that this network carries on in the interests of the stakeholders?
Kind of along the lines of that, like, anybody can actually take a stake and participate in the governance of these protocols. It's certainly not equal, but they're borderless jurisdictions where the rules are actually transparent and everybody has access to the same information.
The design of Kusama network is an economic design, which means that ultimately it's an economic game. So components of the network only act by selfish interest. But what that they don't realize, or that they do realize, but it's the optimal choice, is that this individual interest creates collective wealth or creates collective benefit. So what the incentive economic design allows you to do is to direct people, or not to force them, but to direct people to work together for collective wealth.
The problem with something like Kusama is it is like very, very complex compared to normal blockchains. So if I take Bitcoin, Bitcoin can do smart contracts in its form via the scripts, but basically what it allows you to do, it allows you to move funds from A into B. And we've been busy with that for, quite some time, since 2009. And still, users out in the street, they struggle with just doing a transfer from A to B. Then you end up with Kusama, where you've got transfers from A to B. You've got democracy. You've got staking. Now, staking is quite interesting because you can be a validator where you run own machines, or you can be a nominator. Then you've got things like society floating around. Then you've got treasury. Then you've got tips. The number of things that you can do on this it's just sprawled like a little tree. So now for each of those, you need to try and make it simple. And it's incredibly, and I'm not saying, nobody's given up, but it's really a difficult thing to make as simple as possible for just the man off the street.
Kusama, in many respects, is for social experiments. It's really to see how at the boundary of humans and technology, and particularly humans and autonomous technology, humans and technology that just sort of operates in and of itself, in and of its own algorithm, without any real fundamental requirement for any particular humans or human organizations to do anything. And it's really, Kusama's really about the envelope between, on the one hand, this autonomous technology, autonomous algorithms, and on the other hand, humans and human desires and human impulses and needs, to see how to explore how these interact.
Kusama and Polkadot are very special systems. They can adapt to changes in their environment, and for the first time in history, they are not purely human systems, but also are part of the system from the very beginning. The machines and the well-defined processes for interaction between all the actors that are part of the system, and they are at the same level, and all of them are first-class citizens.
Once we have parachains, the ability to have two completely sovereign blockchains with their own governance, their own system, their own blockchain, be able to send messages back and forth in a trustless way without any intermediary. That's powerful.
So society is a very interesting module or palette or feature that exists on Kusama. Basically, it's a group that is incentivized to collect members into the group and have those members participate in maintaining the society. So imagine a group of people who, if you can recruit other people who will also recruit other people and maintain and vote and participate in this society, that everyone will get rewarded as a result.
The society is based around this idea of a proof of ink, which is basically a tattoo. And it's designed as a strong signal that is not about money. Most things in blockchain ultimately boil down to economic, in a very financial sense of the word, incentivization.
And this is really an interesting experiment, because if you think about it, every group kind of has like a leader or some kind of person who is the head of that group. And we do have words like that in this society, but there really is no one person who can make radical changes to the society working.
And this is where this tattoo comes in. It's a non-financial signal of the strength of one's belief, and it ties into both oracles and actuators. So we have both, we're actuating in that we are incentivizing this particular action to happen, this getting a tattoo. And we're oracleizing in that we use the existing members to vote on whether indeed the tattoo has happened. It combines some other things. This notion of a random number generator, so a degree of luck is involved with the selection of at each point who is the new head of the chain. It's also an interesting riff on the idea of a blockchain in that it's a human blockchain. Every new member references the past member or a past member, one of the most recent people to get a tattoo. And so we end up with a sort of a set of people all linking up to each other, spanning the world.
I think of the society as kind of like an alliance between the human and the machine, right? I strongly feel that the dichotomy natural artificial doesn't exist anymore in our reality, not in the society reality, but in general in our communities, in the communities we live. This doesn't happen anymore, and we need to start seeing ourselves as cyborgs, right, in the concepts of Haraway, for example. And so for me, the society is an initial representation of this alliance between humans and machines.
I think the idea of oracleizing and actuating in order to gain membership to a group, a collective, is in the same sense as the Kusama society, is something that can be repeated. I don't think it will necessarily be proof of ink, but for sure proof of some non-trivial action or deed in order to gain membership of a society and potentially continue membership of a society is something that,
society is something that will basically move away, and instead of people, for example, asking the treasury as individual, I can imagine that societies will ask for grants to the treasury, and the treasury will provide some funding to these societies that will be then able to self-organize and manage themselves without always involving the council.
I would like Kusama to experiment a bit more when it comes to collective organization and the way identity can be built with different components of the network.
This concept of digital states, I think it's very powerful. I think it can be built on top of Kusama. Maybe we see in the future people belonging to this digital state paying for some services that are only available in this digital state, and maybe having one Kusama passport, I don't know, or maybe being able to access some specific services that are online or through some DApp, decentralized application only available to Kusama citizens. There are lots of interesting things in that sense.
As a non-technical person, I think it's very, very important that we open doors for non-technical people to understand what these networks mean. And the society is a way for them to understand how they can make use of the treasury and to educate themselves on Kusama network and to be part of a collective that will support them when it comes to experimentation between identity and technology.
So I've been around blockchain since 2011. And if I look at how Bitcoin evolved, how Ethereum evolved, and what's happening on Kusama, I definitely believe that we've reached the point where we definitely need governance on chain.
Every decentralized project has governance, whether or not it's on chain or not, right? The problem with not having on-chain governance is, generally speaking, the governance process becomes very opaque, or it becomes susceptible to being captured.
Decentralized governance is a challenge. Governance is very easy when there's a CEO and they can make all the shots. It's much harder when you have a bunch of people and somehow everyone must feel as though they had their fair share of input into the final decision, that they were appropriately represented. But yet there is still only one decision, despite there being a plurality of opinions. It's very, very difficult, and it's something that we as humans are still very much working on, but we do have some idea of systems that tend to stand the test of time to manage a plurality of people. And it's not just systems of voting, it's not just apparatus of government, it's not just organizing things into organs of democracy. This is also about forming a fraternity, to coin a non-gendered version of fraternity. This is about making people feel as though even if their opinions happen not to be the way that something was decided for the collective, that they are nonetheless they feel nonetheless a part of the collective, regardless.
What sort of democracy in general allows is it's a fast way a faster way of adapting to the needs of the system. And now you can, if you have someone in charge and they make the right decisions, it works. I won't argue with that. But at some point, things can go wrong, and then there could be very difficult issues in trying to make it work. The one person goes off the rails. That happens with many projects, with many systems. How do we recover? And governance just gives you a way of doing that.
Having tokens all owned by one or a set of small individuals is generally bad, because these people can influence these markets in ways like they can pump and dump, or they can do a lot of things that could influence it. Even let's say the governance systems. The governance systems could be influenced by these huge whales who have a lot of tokens and vote in a certain direction, right? And so this is definitely a problem. I think one of the things that's natural about any blockchain is that if we have a blockchain where the token holders is very centralized, the value of the network drops, right? The more decentralized the token holders are of a network, the more value that we can see there is of the network.
I think it's an issue, and hopefully it will change over time to a certain degree. Since if tokens increase, you probably start selling some of it, and shares also. Usually at the beginning of stocks, you have people that have a lot of shares, but then you start selling it, and your actual it decreases what you own.
If you say that I promise that I'm going to stay on the chain for a very, very, very long time after this vote, and if you are going to be dealing with the consequences of your decision for a much longer time than other people, because you've locked yourself onto the chain with conviction, then it's probably reasonable for you to have more voting power.
So conviction allows us to avoid a situation in which whales or big token holders are voting on their own benefit for referenda. So that's why conviction is also so important.
I think for now the Constitution is the code itself, right? It inscribes the rules of kind of like the rights within the protocol that everybody has.
So many questions today are new questions. People have never seen that before. People have never done that before. And I'm sure that after answering this question a few times, we're going to build some kind of framework or constitution, as you call it, where there will be base principles.
So encoding one's belief system, or the collective's belief system, in a single piece of text is not really sufficient. It must also be encoded in some sense through a living body that knows how to interpret that piece of text. The piece of text can help, of course, but it's not really enough. Of course, there's also precedent. You can look at other systems like the British legal system, and rather than attempting to encode something as a sort of a set of rules, it merely encodes it as a set of examples. And again, it's up to humans to fill in the gaps, to extrapolate from these examples, rather than interpolate the rules. I do hope that Kusama will work towards working out what it is that it believes, and it may not just be the stakeholders, the assembled Kusama holders that do that, but also partly through some of these other governance bodies.
First of all, there is the whole community is decentralized. If anyone today wants to be part of this project, it's super easy to go online, fetch the code, fetch the documentation. You don't need to ask anyone for any permission, you just do it and you're part of it. Now, in terms of usage, Polkadot and Kusama are decentralized. Again, anyone can run a node, anyone can become a validator and be part of the network.
There isn't a singular person or party that can enact its power over everyone else on the system. That end of the day, the rules which define how you interact with this blockchain are built such that that it applies equally to everyone. And because it applies equally to everyone, and we give equal opportunity for people to get access to tokens, for people to contribute and vote and all that stuff, that we inherently do not have a single point of failure or a single point of power in the system. And as a result, I would say it's decentralized. But really, decentralized means a lot of things too. Like the fact that Kusama is a network run across the world, right? That there are nodes all around the world is one form of decentralization, right? That there are different communities with different beliefs on what Kusama should be is in some sense decentralized, right?
How we express the values like truth in a system where anyone can express anything they want. And I think that personally, I'd say that anyone can say anything they want, but maybe we want some other system on top to work out whether people are honest. So we know that this was a lie, even though we don't stop it from being spread.
Polkadot doesn't actually have to care about the data that is stored within Polkadot. It's about the humans on the outside and how they interpret that data. So you could certainly have front ends that interact with Polkadot that are able to choose to display or not display certain information. And then it's up to whoever makes those front ends of how they want to interact with the information within the protocol and what they want to show to their users.
Yeah, it's a bit the difficulty of labeling. As soon as you start saying we need to have that many, a ratio for countries or gender or whatever criteria you take, you kind of build the opposite. So my take on that is that I don't really care and I don't pay attention. There is no such a thing when you create a Polkadot account as gender. Nowhere is your gender written. So I think it is not something that should matter too much. Usually you know gender because people let you know about it in some ways. So I think there are also ways to avoid making your gender knows, and this way it's completely irrelevant for anyone. We're even thinking about gender as a binary thing, but some people want to be seen as something non-binary and they decide to be a third or fourth option. I don't think it has changed anything about governance and the topics we're talking about. So I think it's the kind of thing that is very nice to not take into consideration.
I don't know if we should do something specifically to attract women or other communities that have traditionally been discriminated against. I think the network should be open for everyone, and the council should support programs that are inclusive, not only to women, but to the LGBTQ community, to everyone.
I definitely think that the council and Kusama right now, as it stands, is not representative of society as a whole. It can be argued that it is representative of the crypto space as a whole right now, and we should aim for better than the crypto space, especially if we want to affect the real world. Do we have strategies to change that? For sure. And that starts with decoupling Kusama from the crypto space and coupling it to the real world. Because if Kusama becomes a reflection of the real world, it will reflect the real world internally better as well.
It's kind of a new form of a political entity and organization, and it has aspects of democracy for sure, but it also has aspects of kind of a company in some respects. It's got aspects of kind of a nation in some respects. So it has all these different attributes.
It is democratic. I wouldn't call it a democracy because each individual person doesn't have as much of a degree of control as all others. It's different depending on multiple factors. One is, of course, the amount of KSM, the amount of Kusama tokens that they control, but the other is the amount of the degree to which they are willing to wed themselves into the system. So the length of time that they're willing to guarantee their stake will remain within the system. I don't think that Kusama should be democratic. I don't think that, in general, a democracy is the best way of running an economic system. It's important to not attempt to not automatically consider Hellenic democracy as some sort of silver bullet that can be applied to everything and expect it to work.
I think at this point in time, if we're really honest, there's definitely influence of some quite big coin holders in exactly where we need to go. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's the way it's set up. And the people with the most amount of tokens on the network has got the most to lose. So if you've got more to lose, I believe you've got more skin in the game, so you should have more voice. That's my personal opinion. Is it as decentralized as it should be? I don't believe it is. I think with a little bit of effort, we can trim down the number of Parity and Web3 Foundation members in the council.
It doesn't make sense for it to be a democracy. We're trying to make it fair, and we're trying to make it such that everyone can have their say, right? I mean, in a strict sense, you could call it a plutocracy because you vote with tokens, which is very much a sort of maybe a more corporate model. And of course, the reason for that is because we don't have a means to disable people, to stop someone from running 1,000 accounts. How do you get around that? But apart from that, it's like you want to build in mechanisms to make it fair.
Kusama is as close to democracy as we've ever gotten in any blockchain system. You, as someone who owns tokens on Kusama, have a voice. And this voice will grow as you participate in Kusama, like if you're nominating or validating, your token issuance will grow, and you can use this voice to make changes which you think are positive to this to the blockchain. So absolutely, we have a democracy. Once you make a change proposal on the Kusama, you directly are voting for enacting that change. And I mean, that's the power of democracy. That's truly that your voice is whether or not that change will happen. And this is, again, a little different than in even current societies where I can vote on a topic, but maybe my vote gets delegated to some other person. And this person votes different than how I want it. That's not how it is in Polkadot or in Kusama. In Kusama, you exactly vote for what you want to happen.
I see the treasury as being sort of the limbs of Kusama into the real world.
For me, it is one of the most powerful mechanism that Kusama and Polkadot has, because they represent how the network can auto-regenerate itself. This is the output of all the process, is where these funds go.
So the treasury is, first of all, it's filled up from the network itself. So every time someone is making a transaction, there is a little part of this transaction that will go to the treasury. So the treasury is growing over time. The goal being to be able to reinvest some amount, some funds from the treasury to build the ecosystem.
So at the moment, we have two types of spending mechanisms, spending proposals and tips, right? And so anyone can propose a spending proposal and anyone can tip, but it's not enough. We need to kind of like find a more efficient way for the council to allocate the resources. And so, for example, at the moment, I'm working with other community members into kind of like a third proposal that will allow the council to allocate the resources in the treasury and kind of like unlock these portions for bounties that will be taken by community members and monitored by a curator.
I'm sure we're going to see lots of projects around education. So, for example, documentation and movies to explain how things work, to make it more accessible, because the whole ecosystem grew a lot, and today it's much easier to use than 1 or 2 years ago. But there are still lots of work to be done to make it more accessible for people at different levels.
Any proposer that works in the link between technology and art, any proposer that works with technology as a way to express their art should be able to access the treasury. If they can justify how the funds will be spent in a proposal and the proposal makes sense for the community. There are different ways to contribute to the community, and developing code or developing patches for the network is not the only way. Entering the discussion on what Kusama means for social movements, for political movements, on what Kusama means for digital art and visualization and design, it's also very, very important, because it opens doors to other users that have not been heard yet, or that have been heard not so widely.
And you can have such a larger design space with what Kusama's for. Like it could be there to make money for the Kusama holders. It could be there to propagate a belief. It could be there to just give grant funding for things that otherwise wouldn't get funded. For the edgy experimental stuff that the foundation might not feel comfortable funding, Kusama could do. So it just has a much wider breadth and larger design space to experiment than kind of a foundation who has its charter in Switzerland to do a very specific thing.
I'm always, I have to say, I don't know exactly what a cypherpunk agenda is, but it fits to a certain degree some people in our ecosystem, definitely, yeah.
We'd love to. I'm not entirely sure if our agenda can be described as cyberpunk. We're trying to be radical when it comes to, you know, I'm sure certain people would regard themselves as crypto anarchists, and that's definitely a cyberpunk agenda. That this technology will enable new forms of engagement for people.
Kind of like the glitch branding, the words around experimentation, risk-taking, the fact that this is an entity that can express its economic will and is funding like dark dexes and fiat on-ramps and that sort of thing is kind of, you know, to the extent it does that with gambling, etc. You know, prediction markets, whatever, pushing the boundaries there of what's socially acceptable for these blockchains to do is probably pretty interesting.
The community of Kusama is such that it definitely could form one. But I think Kusama today is not quite so organized to have a true agenda yet, if that makes sense. So we are inviting the right set of people to come into the society, into the group, the community, to really be kind of that kind of interesting, you know, leader in that world.
I hope so. I am not sure, but I hope so. Because we have a lot of people who try to change the system and try to do experiments with the government and with society, with things how the society needs to be.
We're not really. So this is the problem with designing a plutocratic system. It's a capitalist system. Unfortunately, Kusama is capitalist, but it's a capitalism where we get to design the rules. We get to see what went wrong and how we can design mechanisms, incentives, everything to do things differently. But Kusama itself will never be post-capitalist because it's proof of stake, and proof of stake is capitalism. One of the killer ideas behind blockchain is that we can design our own money, and in a sense our own capitalist system that works independently of all existing ones. But we can't. We didn't do this by escaping the basic idea. We can reinvent capitalism, but moving beyond it, that's a different question.
It's at least the beginning of a serious discussion on the negativities of capitalism. It's the beginning of a serious discussion on how to democratize wealth. And if it's in that sense, then yes, it could be the end of capitalism as we know it in a few years.
I think capitalism will kill itself, in my opinion. What I can say for sure is that Kusama is not in the capitalism flow or anything like that.
I don't think anywhere in the world really has capitalism. It also depends on like how you think of so like the libertarian like Hayek view of capitalism is that everybody is kind of equally ignorant and everybody has a very small piece of information and they act kind of according to their incentives on that. I don't think that really exists anymore. There are organizations, whether they're nation states or companies like Google and Facebook, that just have so much more information. It's actually kind of funny because like Russians actually call people oligarchs who have this kind of power.
One of the problems that we're seeing is that people in our current capitalist system, with enough money, they're able to change the way that rules apply to them, right? These are the kinds of problems with the accumulation of wealth in our system. But a system like Kusama and Polkadot has no such concept, that it doesn't matter how much tokens you have, the same rules apply to you. And so these aspects of kind of the failed parts of capitalism, I think, are on their way out. So I think we are seeing the end of this to some extent. As a way to counter wealth or accumulation is to have something like quadratic voting. So quadratic voting basically says that the amount of power you have to influence the governance is based off of the square root of the number of tokens you have. So if I own 1 token, my power is 1. If I own 9 tokens, my power is 3. If I own 25 tokens, my power is 5. So you can see that even though I own 25 more tokens than 1, 25 times more tokens, my power is only increased by 5 times. So this means that people with much, much more wealth really aren't significantly more powerful than an individual. And when you look at a broad scale, having a bunch of people all, with a bunch of smaller individuals all voting on something in one direction, a super whale would not be able to influence the vote in a different direction. So this is one mechanism to avoid that.
It's a good, we should start thinking about it. Same thing like with Fragment to make the on-chain voting system or nomination process to come up with new systems that are potentially more fair. I hope, my personal hope is that actually proof of stake will lead to a situation where the funds get distributed more equalized in the long term. But we will see if this actually is going to happen.
For me, Web3 technology has at least 2 components. It's open source technology first, and it has a very strong element of the cypherpunk philosophy behind it.
Web3 is, I would say, to Web2 what open source software is to closed source software. The difference is that it's not about software anymore, it's about services. Web3 is about creating kind of open services. Web2 is all about building closed ecosystems. It's about having a single interest controlling a service, and regardless of whether or the degree to which that service's software happens to be open, the key thing is that the service or the platform is itself closed.
Yeah, I think the people against Web3 are the traditional Web2 companies that are going to get hurt by these changes, right? Like you can see that in the blockchain space that the finance people have for a long time held a very negative view of Bitcoin, Ethereum, and other cryptocurrencies, because they know that once the power of finance goes to these blockchain systems, that they lose a lot of the power which they have, right? A lot of these intermediate third parties which handle these middle ground, interactions will also be, challenged by these decentralized systems, and as a result, I think they'll be antagonists to it. I think another set of antagonists are people who just don't understand the technology, right? That people who take for granted kind of how much technology has evolved and how these cryptographic systems work, and they don't quite understand how it works. And it's much more clear to them to kind of have, okay, well, there's this company, Google or Amazon or Microsoft, and they control these systems, and I trust them, and therefore things are okay. Versus saying things like, okay, well, there's this Bitcoin blockchain and no one owns it, and there's no country around it, and all that stuff. Like these people they're hesitant to, I think, put their trust into these systems because they don't have the technological understanding of what's happening in the background.
Are you using blockchain technology, or are you using cryptocurrency to avoid taxes? Are you using cryptocurrency to, deal drugs? Are you using cryptocurrency for human trafficking? These issues already happen with fiat. It's not our job to solve tax havens. It's not our job to solve tax evaders. It's the government's job, and they should solve it.
if I was in a room with a person from another country and they were complaining about taxes, I would, as a developer, tell them, hey, like if you have this problem with taxes, you should build your currency on a blockchain. You know, the best way that you can prevent users from avoiding taxes is building the taxes into the blockchain system itself, right? Every single transaction that happens on a blockchain happens through the logic of the blockchain. And you can build a tax system right into the logic so that it's impossible to send a transaction without getting taxed.
At this point in time, I think the biggest use case for Kusama is really around the funding. Where I wouldn't have predicted it, and it might change in the next while, but definitely for at least the short to the medium term. Because if I look at what we've done in the ecosystem, we've addressed all those things in different ways via the Web3 Foundation, via things like Gitcoin, via different, people have done ICOs and different types of things. So we're really changing the way we can actually do funding on the blockchain.
In my opinion, like I want to incentivize people who are artists and creators to start using Kusama to sustain themselves, or like create new models for sustaining themselves and creating sustainable work.
Art and creativity, obviously. There's also the way of that people create digital art, sell it, and yeah.
Full automation is probably not what we want. But I think that when we talk about automation, what we talk about really is less need for human interaction. So I, as a person who wants to participate in Kusama, I don't want to have to wake up every day, open my computer, and check every hour what's happening on Kusama, right? I want natural things to happen. I want to check in maybe like once a week or whatever. So we have a bunch of systems built into Kusama which allow for proxy. So I can have my account be proxied by another user. And so this other user can do votes on my behalf.
There are details where machines are not yet good at. Maybe there humans are better at, and yeah, we can collaborate.
I think it will and could eventually evolve into something much more like a sort of futarchy, where there aren't any particular people in power. There is no delegation. It's simply a decision-making mechanism that comes about as an emergent effect within a social system or socioeconomic system, rather than a system that is designed to allow people to vote, specifically, directly vote. I think we will end up with much better eventual, or much more success on the level of the blockchain, on the level of this thing with agency, if we utilize the emergent effects of things like the market mechanism, rather than try to replicate essentially outdated governance means into the digital realm.
In every technology, there's always super winners who are winning above everyone else. You may not be the next Bitcoin billionaire, but you definitely, when blockchains take over the world, you will definitely live a better life because of it. And every single part of your daily interaction will be better because blockchain systems provide so many better benefits to individuals across so many different facets and features that everyone will benefit. So I don't think there will be anyone who's a loser. I think there will be everyone's a winner, but some people will win more, and some people will win more because they're willing to take risks. And I think that risk takers always have a higher chance of winning more.
I hope that we will come up with systems that benefit everyone. Like there's, for example, a Cointer, which has some ideas around basic income models, and I think something like this is needed. And in general, I'm in favor that the higher you are, the more difficult it should get to get even more power. And I think blockchains and decentralized systems potentially could create such or solutions for this?
I would definitely love to see some work in, extending governance and making it as simple as going onto Reddit, our politics, and having a discussion and being a poll and voting and everything that fits in with the world in which we live in, which is like a decentralized environment.
I personally believe that Polkadot can enable people to build things that are more like a real commons, but even Polkadot itself has walls, right? Polkadot and Kusama have walls, and that is their token economics that is having to have the existential deposit. So they're not true commons either.
The ability of ideas to travel around the world has typically led to much more prosperity, changing the way people travel from, say, walking to horseback to something mechanical like an automobile, and then finally to an airplane. This allowed ideas to travel much faster around the world and let people cooperate and interact in a much more organic way than they would have been able to.
We're kind of at uncharted territory, basically. Like, civilization has been busy working away at these incredibly sophisticated ways of concentrating power, right? Blockchain is interesting in that it is in some sense a way, maybe not economically so much, but it is a way of rediluting power, right? It's rather than having a single bank in control of all the Bitcoin, which is how it would normally have been in the past, lots of nodes all form consensus on it. So in some sense, it's democratizing not wealth, but democratizing the control of wealth, the administration of wealth. It's a big difference, but it's a step in the right direction for sure, because if you democratize the administration of wealth, then it means it's much harder to just magically create wealth out of nothing without anyone really knowing.
From a purely theoretical standpoint, the Kusama and any other blockchain network does not need to abide by any regulations other than the rules defined on the blockchain itself. It has been shown time and time again that governments and countries that can't stop blockchains. They can't shut them down. They can't stop people from using them. And so, end of the day, no matter what the regulations and regulators say out there, they're going to do whatever they want on the blockchain. And the only rules that are enforced on the blockchain are the blockchain rules themselves.
I'm not sure about the current elite, but I'm scared that there will be still a big elite, and which basically controls everything, and it won't be really decentralized. That's what we are currently seeing with proof of work and Bitcoin, with these proof of stake system also to a certain degree. So everything always thrives to centralization, and
no, I don't think they can democratize wealth at all. If anything, these sorts of technical advancements go in the opposite direction, actually place wealth into the hands of even fewer people. Just because technology facilitates power, and power facilitates wealth concentration. That said, I think they can facilitate the power of the collective and the control, collective control of this power, which I think is important. I think they will, the wealth will come to a different group of people, so it will alter who the wealth holders are. And in that sense, it doesn't necessarily benefit the existing wealth holders. It benefits probably disproportionately people that are outside of the existing sort of wealth. It's a shift. I don't think it's a fix for the sort of left-wing sort of dream of full wealth distribution.
So there's never going to be a completely collaborative, non-competitive society, but there are ways to make systems that make it easier to collaborate than it is to compete with people, or make systems that make that communication, make the communication necessary to collaborate easier. And communication involves things like, how do you transfer value from people to other people?
If we manage to dissociate the connection between competition and profit, and we make sure that the components of the system know that they will get rewarded for shared knowledge, then competition is not bad. It allows innovation and is healthy.
One thing that I've been seeing quite a bit of is people realizing that technology is inherently political and is inherently, you embed your values in the technology that you create, right? And the technology that you create spreads those values to people that use it. Things like Facebook, like the current web, have mechanisms that make the way that they were designed infect the people that use it. And I feel like Polkadot and several other like distributed web and decentralized technologies will have that same effect, hopefully, in having values in the core technology that start infecting slowly the people that use it.
The social consensus around a system like this is also very important, and there are a lot of things that can or cannot change based on the social consensus. This might be even more important than the actual on-chain consensus.
Since mobile technology became a thing, we have revolutionized an awful lot of stuff. And in some sense, you can say, well, you've got Facebook, we've got Twitter, there are collectives that have, that are pretty kind of agile, but they're not economically strong. These collectives do not have very much power, and the power that they do have tends to be wielded without control.
If you want to go really, really, really far, we can even imagine blockchain as a completely autonomous and sovereign entity in our nation-state legal frameworks, with the ability to hold assets and the ability to interact off-chain the same way as they do on-chain, in a democratic way with its members. And then the collectives, political parties, social movements, NGOs, joining the network as autonomous collectives as well. Yeah.
It's important that any power that you get from building a global collective that believes strongly about something, is that the collective's aggregate strength cannot be directed by a small minority that just happen to be very vocal. We need more transparency and more openness, but also a greater degree of sort of collective rule following and enforcement and governance, basically, in order to allow these large global movements not only to have the power that they get from having so many followers, but also to properly represent the interests of those followers, what they believe they are, and to form a coherent voice. It might stay to a mostly digital realm, but I think that's the way the world is going. So I don't think that shouldn't be read as I don't think it's going to have much of an impact in real life, because I think real life will become almost entirely digital fairly soon anyway.
So I don't distinguish Kusama and Polkadot as being or Kusama being different from Polkadot from experimenting with governance. But I do see that Kusama is definitely one that will experiment more with building communities and building societies on the blockchain. And so this is, for me, the most interesting thing that that Kusama can bring to the world, kind of testing this, all the different ways that we could build DAOs or build, communities on the blockchain.
I know I can't solve the world's problems, and there are more clever people that are doing X and there's cleverer people that are doing Y. But I'm inviting them to come along with me And together we can be stronger and we can build a stronger movement.
Хотите верить или нет? Мы все вместе, как один.
We are the birds, we are the trees,